All right. So welcome everybody to the June 13th, 2024 edition of the Technical Advisory Council of the Confidential Computing Consortium. For those of you who are celebrating Pride Month, happy Pride Month to you. We are always welcoming of everybody in the consortium. We are founded on the idea that we're going to do better as a group, collaborating openly than what we can do individually. Or just within our own companies. Because we represent a lot of different companies that might be competing, we also follow the antitrust policy of the Linux Foundation, and you can go to linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy to read the details of that. So the planned agenda for today was mostly around two PQC talks. One from our very own John Manfredelli, and then another colleague in the Linux Foundation, Hart Montgomery. We might have had a little logistical snag there, so very likely that we will run short. And then
I can talk forever about cryptography, so.
That's great. So I think you'll have an adequate slot. So normally we plan about 30 minutes for the tech talks, but
Okay.
in this case, you're welcome to use more. Any other big topics that people were expecting to discuss today?
If you've got time, I'd quite like to bring up a topic of interest that I'd like to sort of float with people a bit, but it's not urgent. Oh, and we should also talk about how good it was to see everyone who made it to the summit last week. Sorry you weren't able to make that down, but we met lots of people and lots of people in person, which is great.
Yeah, I would love if people wanted to give a short recap of the summit. Maybe we can fit that in after the other intros before we get going with John. Okay. All right. With that, we will do our normal quick flyby of the roll call, because again, we don't have votes today. But appreciate seeing Harold and Catherine on, and I'm here, and I think I lost track of my participants tab. We do have Henry here as well. Thanks for joining, Henry and Kevin. And then Alec is out this week. It was nice of him to send a note ahead of time to let us know that. Fritz, thanks again for joining. And Yash, see you on as well as Ram. So thanks both of you for joining. And then do we have Mingshen or Yao? Okay, it doesn't look like we have TikTok today unless my eyes missed them in the list. And you would like to introduce yourself, we encourage everybody to introduce themselves at least twice so that we get to know each other. So if you haven't had the opportunity to do that twice, let us know how you like to be addressed, where you're joining from, and what it is that you like to do with confidential computing or what you're trying to develop with it.
You're scared now, it's preferably twice in two different meetings. It's not twice in the same meeting.
I mean, you can.
Well, yeah, not holding you up here.
I don't think I've introduced myself before, so I will do that now. My name is Hugo Vincent from ARM. I have participated in a handful of TAC meetings before, but not for a while. I'm part of the Veracruz project at ARM, and I work on ARM's confidential computer architecture, and my interest is in particular around post-quantum cryptography, which is why I joined the session.
Oh, that's great, Hugo. Thanks for joining. I'm glad that you saw that in the post to the list. All right, well, I think I recognize everybody's name here on the list, so we'll go ahead and step forward in the agenda. The minutes are up from the last meeting. I can't remember if they've been merged or not. But if not, people could please take a look at those and get any missing approval, and we can get those squared away. And Rian, I feel like you sent me a note that you added something to the announcements. Is that right?
Yes, I just added the brand repositioning working group is going well. So I just added some updates about what's going on there. So people can just follow the links and participate. Everybody's encouraged. There's a specific Slack channel for that now. So everybody is welcome to participate. And then I also added the list that came out this week, if you want to discuss that on the mailing list.
Yeah, so let's discuss both of these. I talked to Kate, the outreach chair, earlier this week, and she mentioned that there's pretty good participation across the consortium members in this repositioning working group, except that we don't necessarily have anybody from the TAC. And so having that technical voice in this repositioning would be helpful. By how we named it as brand repositioning, it sounds very, marketing oriented, but the higher level intent of this from the board was that we really need to put like the usage forward more than the technology, and in particular for things like AI and secure software supply chain. So if those are interest areas of yours, or you're doing some work with that, with either of those, or any other use case with confidential computing, you'd really be able to help that group out in how we tell that story so that people understand how to use confidential computing to protect those use cases. Second thing, the NIST I don't know if it's an RFC exactly, but there's a draft publication out, and they normally invite feedback on those, and I think that's the nature of this one. Do you have things to share on that, Rian?
No, it just caught my eye on the mailing list, and I thought it might be important for the group, so I just popped it in here.
Yeah, thanks. Do we have anybody from the GRC SIG on the call? So I think I looked at this one or one that relates to it.
I think this was an email from Mark, was it not, who'd noticed this and kind of put it to the list? He's
exactly
very good about that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And we had done a good job of responding to these in the first quarter, and I don't think we've really done much in Q2. So it'd really be good for us to make sure that we're continuing to get confidential computing appropriately mentioned in these kinds of public documents. So if you haven't had a chance to look at this one, maybe skim through it and put some thoughts together about our response. This one, I think, was a little bit more network oriented. This should be apparent from the title of it. But I also recall there was a connection from this one to something lower layer or vice versa. So even if the topic doesn't seem exactly on point with what you might be working on, there's a lot of interconnection between these documents. Okay, so maybe let's pause here for a moment, and if people had been able to attend the summit, which I unfortunately was not able to, I would love to hear some reactions to your time there, any big takeaways that you had, maybe some things you didn't expect to see that were pleasant surprises.
I'm very happy to chat. After you, I'll go last.
I can share my takeaways from the conference. First of all, it was the first conference. I couldn't join last year, but it was the first conference for me that people knew what confidential computing was. Close to 100% of the participants knew. Usually when we go to conferences, we ask people whether they have any clue about it, and most of them, like 99%, do not know. So that was a good thing to have. It was like a family reunion in that essence. It was good to see the hype, the fact that more people are coming. It was twice the size of last year, as far as I understood, and it feels like more and more people start to consider the technology. And it's also good, we are a company that lives on selling solutions for confidential computing. It's good to see that there is a competition. Competition is something that is very important for us to show that there is a market for these solutions. So that was great. Yeah. The one thing that I felt that was maybe very biased or one-sided in a way is that everyone talked about AI, which makes a lot of sense, but it feels like it's important for us, and I think that we're doing that here, to make sure that people understand that confidential computing is valuable and needed not only for AI and Gen AI, but also for every workload with sensitive data. And I think that if someone was learning about confidential computing from this summit, they could have gone out with that understanding that I need it if I'm doing AI or Gen AI, and this is it.
That's good feedback.
Anyone else?
I was about to say a similar thing, that I was surprised by just how many of the talks were about confidential AI, and that was really interesting to a number of also the other folks I talked to. But at the same time, I didn't have the feeling that it's only that. So there were quite some other talks that were then more about already being deployed solutions, like the ATAC talk that Google folks had and others. So it felt more like the confidential AI stuff this is coming, right? And then you had the other range of talks of this is already here that were not about AI. So indeed, it was like a huge part of it about AI, because most of the other things are already seemingly being deployed, which also was nice to see.
Anyone else?
Fritz, you mentioned the attack paper by, did you say Google?
AdTech talk. I can link it later here in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, ad tech.
Yeah, I would be interested to see that.
So I'll give a brief chat if I may. So I gave one of the keynotes, which was lots of fun. I talked about vacuum cleaners because, obviously you do. It's an analogy I use. If anyone wants to know, I can go over another time. As people said, there are loads of people there, which is fantastic. It did seem quite heavily AI based. There was a committee who decided what to go with, but I've also heard that the balance between business and tech was not always as one would have liked, and maybe having different tracks and protecting the tracks for particular things might have helped. One thing that I found I had a lot of feedback on was I talked a bit about business models for attestation, and it's something that I want to talk about later on, maybe in this one, or generally, is we need to talk about how we make attestation happen as a community, and that's a technical discussion and a business and money discussion to have. And there were lots of people very interested in talking about that, and it's something that I hope people here would also be interested to talk about, and I'm very happy to chat about that. But I will be starting some sort of maybe not working group or some sort of work stream on that fairly soon, because I have got quite a lot of people showing interest. But no, it was really good. I thought there was some very interesting technical talks and some interesting non-technical talks as well. And it was just great to see everybody and have lots of conversations. So thanks to everyone who came. Thanks to everyone who sent colleagues. And I hope you get well briefed if you weren't able to attend. And thank you so much to Kate and Rian and Sal and all the other people who are involved in making it happen, and Apek, of course. I should also be clear, sorry, just one fun thing, that although we co-branded it, this is not owned by the CCC. So that's something that we obviously need to work out how all that works.
All right, that's great. Thanks for the updates on that, Mike. I think that there's a couple things that we want to do with attestation that we're not doing yet. One of them is what you just said. The other is in our OKR document, there's some verbiage around trying to make it easier for the rest of the world to understand and adopt, and getting to like some simplified statements about it so that we've got better communication. And a lot of that was intended to be delivered through the attestation SIG or produced in the attestation SIG. And I don't think we've really been doing that yet. So maybe
we're coming up with some languages really about concepts, which kind of, I don't know what happened to that, but look at that again, I guess.
Yeah, and so that might be something that Ben, that you and I can talk about in the coming week or two here, is how we can get a little bit more organized with what the SIGs are doing, in the sense of getting towards concrete outcomes instead of only being limited to the technical presentations that we've been having, which are still valuable, but we need some concrete outcomes coming from these things. And that also reminds me that I did not add a slide into the deck today for during the welcomes. That a few weeks ago we had a goodbye for Ben, and I intended to throw in a welcome back, Ben. So for those of you who don't know,
Helen,
thank you. Helen took another opportunity outside of the CCC, and so we didn't get a great chance to say goodbye to her after she had returned from leave. But we've got Ben back in the seat here, and so thanks to Ben for coming right back, even though you thought you had escaped.
Good to be here. Thank you, Dan.
All right, Mark, it looked like you had your hand up. Maybe you were going to comment back on the NIST thing.
I only wanted to talk about like what SIGs are doing. For the GRC SIG, I would like to seek cooperation with the attestation SIG, because there are actually several things we need to figure out jointly. But I dial into their meetings and I will raise that as appropriate.
Yeah, fully in support of that. I know that you looked for some support on a document some time ago. So we can see what we can do to get that organized a little bit better.
Hey Dan, this is Ram from IBM. I also had joined the conference last week. I got to meet a lot of people over there, including Mike Bursell. And to me, like, this was my first conference, and I got to know the ecosystem well. The one important thing that came to my mind there was like, yeah, most of the workloads were AI, and all the talks were centered, or some had some angle towards AI. And there was one use case that kind of, after hearing to all the talks, the one use case that popped up to the top of my mind was the shared computer workspaces. Like, all the use cases generally use the shared workspaces, like about 90%, not all, about 90% use the shared workspaces to derive immense value out of them. So that was something that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't heard anybody else mention that yet.
Yep, that was it from my side.
All right, great. Okay, well, why don't I cede sharing to John, and we can talk about, or we can hear John tell us about his experience strengthening his project for a post-quantum world.
Okay, I'm not so sure I've strengthened our project, but I did strengthen my knowledge of the algorithms. So, okay, let me get this started. Come on. There we go. All right. So the genesis of this is that, as people have said, a draft, two drafts actually, FIPS 203 and God damn it, and hang on. There we go. FIPS 203 and 204 were published by NIST. Those are the two cryptographic public key algorithms that are supposed to be quantum resistant. So when it was published, I implemented them to try to get a better sense of how it would affect confidential computing. So I'll tell you that. Just a quick background, when people talk about cryptography, they're really talking about a suite of algorithms. There's typically a public key algorithm, RSA 1024, 2048. Then about 2002, several algorithms based on elliptic curve cryptography. So RSA is based on integer factorization. That's the hard problem. And ECC is based on discrete log in an elliptic curve. Public key algorithms are used typically for authentication and key encapsulation. So key encapsulation is you want to send somebody a symmetric key, like an AES key, and you encrypt it with their public key, so only they get it. Then there's symmetric key algorithms, which are used for bulk encryption. DES was one of the early ones. Then around 2000, there was a new standard AES, and came in three flavors: a 128-bit key, 192-bit key, and a 256-bit key. And your intuition should be that a cipher, a good symmetric cipher with a k-bit key, should take about 2 to the k operations to break. And then finally, cryptographic hashes, which are used to digest messages. So they're supposed to be able to stick as long a thing you want in, you get a standard size answer, and it should be very hard to get another thing with that answer. It's used for all kinds of things, message digesting, mixing, digital currencies, all sorts of things. And the intuition should be the strength of a cryptographic hash that's well designed should be about 2 to the k over 2, so square root of the corresponding symmetric cipher. So I often, let me close this so I can see my own screen. I often use this slide, yeah, there we go, to describe the confidential computing primitives, isolation, measurement, secrets, and attestation. And I just put a little quick note in here about where things are used. This is not complete. So for example, isolation measurement typically involves hashing something to get storing secrets usually involves a symmetric cipher. And attestation, the thing people talked about earlier, is a public key operation. And I should mention that when we talk about quantum resistance, typically the only thing we really care about is the public key operation. It's not terribly sensitive to symmetric ciphers and hashes, so those are not expected to change. There are other places we use it in confidential computing. For example, typically people will encrypt memory. That's done with a symmetric cipher, but those are the three operations that we'll care about. Oops. Yeah, there we go. As I said, I already said this, RSA, all public key systems are based on a trapdoor or asymmetric encryption. So one side can use a public information to encrypt stuff, but the receiving party uses a private key to decrypt it. And correspondingly, one party signs with a private key and anybody can verify it with a public key. So RSA is based on integer factorization and ECC discrete log. The newer algorithms are based on what is thought to be a quantum resistant hard problem, that is finding the shortest vector in a very high dimensional lattice. And there are two implementations of it. One is called learning with errors, or LWE, and the other is called ring learning with error. About 2002, people started rationalizing these cipher suites. And the idea is you wanted to make the public key operation and the hash operation about as resistant to attack as the public key operation. And to do that, this surprises some people, an ECC 256-bit key is actually equivalent to a 3072-bit RSA key, or an AES 128-bit key. And people are surprised when they see what's the equivalent of an AES 256-bit key for RSA. It's actually a 15K key. And this is sort of a downside of RSA. The key size grows quickly with the resistance. That's actually not a feature of ECC. You'll see the ECC keys don't get much bigger, but there you go. In 2017, I'm sorry, this may seem a little US-centric, but I think people mostly use the standards. There is a pre-2017 Suite B, it's called in the US, government standard. So if you wanted to sell to the government and you wanted them to use your commercial crypto, you had to implement these algorithms. And they actually had two separate ones. The secret level was RSA 2048, ECC 256, a 256-bit hash, and AES 128. So these are all supposed to be roughly equivalent to 128-bit AES. RSA is not. I actually think I got the top secret one wrong. I think it's 2048. But there's also a top secret one, which RSA 3072, that might have been 2048, ECC 521, SHA-2 512, and AES 256. And then about 2020, the government said, oh, this is too complicated for people. Oh, this is wrong. I'm going to correct this now. This is very bad. Well, sorry, maybe I'm going to correct it now. They said no more secret, top secret, the same level for everything. I think it was RSA 3072 here, ECC 384 and SHA-2 384. And then the symmetric key was AES 256. Again, you may be a little bit shocked about these key sizes. AES 256 is more powerful than, is more resistant than, say, SHA-2, even in a simple calculation, or RSA 2048 by a lot in ECC 3084. But the arguing was, well, people never really implemented AES 192. They did 128 or 256, so why complicate matters? And then recently, the standard has been sort of solidified and it's been renamed. It's called the Cryptographic National Security Algorithms 2.0. And this one, I'm pretty sure is right, is RSA 3072, ECC 384, the 384-bit hash, and the AES 256. Okay. So the world was fine up till about, well, crypto has actually been fairly stable for a long time. But in 1994, Peter Shor came along with a new algorithm based on a relatively new computational model called quantum computing. In quantum computing, you don't have bits, you have qubits, which actually have many states at the same time, and even more important, can be entangled. So bits, qubits share a state. And it's actually the only non-Turing computational model. Everything else is sort of equivalent to a Turing machine. And people for a very long time, I should say there are two things. There are two kinds of qubits. I could spend a long time talking about quantum computing, but we're not. There's physical qubits, is sort of the most basic kind of quantum states. They are not very long lasting and are very error prone. So a whole bunch of them are aggregated into something called a logical qubit using quantum error correction. So when somebody talks to you about a qubit machine and they want to brag about how many qubits they have, they will typically talk about physical qubits. And so if you ask them how many logical qubits they have, which is what you need for Shor's algorithm or any other real quantum algorithm, they'll sort of go quiet and maybe say, well, 0 or 1. In 1994, Peter Shor came along and said, we can use something called a quantum Fourier transform to vastly improve the speed of either computing direct log or integer factorization. So in fact, so fast that in the quantum time step, breaking integer factorization in discrete log takes about the same time as actually doing the encryption. That's bad for a public key system. Now, for the skeptics, I should point out there is no quantum computer in sight. There is a National Academy of Sciences report, Quantum Computing Progress and Prospects, in 2018, that sort of looks at where people are on the scale of building a quantum computer with a decent number of logical qubits, and it's not horribly encouraging. Okay, but despite that, NIST said, okay, there's an algorithm, at least a theoretical algorithm, that would break our current public key systems, and we better start having one that's rooted in a quantum hard safe problem. And again, there are several candidates for it, I'd say, but typically what people focused on is the shortest vector in a high dimensional lattice, or SVP problem. It has very nice provable properties. In the very early days in cryptography, people offered public key proposals which had good worst case hardness, but most of the time it was easy to break. So that's not very good. The quantum safe algorithms that have been proposed not only have pretty much average worst case hardness, they've been designed to be resistant and shown to be resistant to sort of very high class attacks, chosen ciphertext adaptive attacks. There are two classes of implementation. I should say NIST announced the intention of having public key systems based on different kinds of algorithms. Another one is called the McLeese system, based on coding theory. But I expect everybody will use the shortest vector algorithm things. For one reason, McLeese, for example, has a gigantic key size. And there has been haven't not seen the draft standard on anything but these shortest vector and lattice based things. So there's learning with errors, and basically the problem is solving simultaneous equations over finite fields and deliberately introducing errors. And the trapdoor is, if you know a particular representation, you can round out the errors, get rid of them. Frodo was based on learning with error. I'm sorry, learning with error. That's called learning with errors. Then the downside of that is those systems have very large keys. And to address that, people started using ring learning with errors. It's roughly the same, solving simultaneous equations over finite fields, but this time over a ring, like the integers mod p, adjoin x. This may mean nothing to you, don't worry too much. Mod x to the n plus 1, and n is about 256. So that's the standard. The winner, the thing that caught my attention and made me start implementing, was published in April. And here's the first wrinkle. The public key shortest key standard is actually two standards. There's crystal dilithium for signing and authentication, and crystal kyber for key encapsulation. Previously, all the other public key systems, signing and key encapsulation, were roughly the same. They weren't really different algorithms. Both of these standards is based on ring learning with error, that hard problem, but they're a little bit different. Actually, they do use different primes. You'll see how they're different. And as I said, they have some nice properties, including shortened key sizes and provable properties about attack. Chris Pikert and Oded Regev are typically the names associated with proving these things. So at this point, I'm going to talk for about 4 slides, and you should go into Zen mode, because there's no way on earth you can understand all this stuff if you haven't seen it before in the first glance, but it'll give you a sense of what people are talking about. I've used the word lattice a lot. Lattice is really just not a vector space, because vector's over field, is a module, I guess is the right term. And instead of having a field like the real numbers, it's over the integers. N is the dimension of the lattice, and they're typically linearly independent. And I've defined the colattice here. The CVP, which is the only thing you should focus on here, the problem stated succinctly is find the vector in that lattice, the thing generated by that thing, which has the shortest size. LWE is based on finding noisy linear equations, mod q, mod an integer. And just as a forecast, the two primes used are like around 8 million. It's actually 2 to the 23 minus 2 to the 13 plus 1 for dilithium, and 3329, which is easier to remember for Kuiper. So you give a bunch of equations, more than the number of variables you're trying to solve for, and you add some error to that. And the errors are chosen from a distribution of errors. Typically not exactly the binomial distribution. It's normally some Gaussian-like distribution. And the decision problem is here you're given B is to find S, a secret S, knowing AS plus E, where A is a matrix over that thing, given the fact that A was chosen randomly over that field. And it's hard to do that. That's a hard problem. Again, just quickly, a typical learning with error problem looks like this. You choose a random distribution for three sets of matrices. One is a secret matrix, one is a public matrix, one is an error matrix. The private key is that first public matrix, and then AS, which is the secret key, plus E. E is the other vector. To encrypt, you choose a vector uniformly at random, and you compute this thing. And then to decrypt, so the ciphertext consists of two things: U, which is A transpose A, and C, which is P transpose A plus this thing. It's the rounding thing. And when you decrypt, you subtract STU, the secret matrix. That will give a matrix which is close to the right answer. And then when you round, you'll get the actual right answer of zeros and ones. Learning with error and ring learning in principle has a probability of failing, so you might have to try it twice because of this rounding operation. But in practice, it basically always works. Just to be a little bit more concrete, here's an example. Here's the randomly generated matrix over a field where Q is 23, which is in fact a prime. And the distribution is a Gaussian distribution with that standard deviation. So there's the public matrix, there's a secret matrix, there's an error matrix, here's the computed P. And to encrypt, I give an example of an encryption using those exact same matrices. That's it. Now, the downside of this is look at the size of the keys here. You have A, and we have a tiny Q. Typically, Q would be very large. As I said, in something like the crystals, it's like 8 million. And I have a 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's not right. 4 by 8 matrix, 32 of these. That's the first part of the public key, and the secret key is equally large. So these key sizes are quite large compared to, say, RSA. Ring RSA uses the same idea, but as I said, the computations are done not over the integers mod prime, but over this, and again, I apologize if you've never used, you're unaccustomed to finite fields and modules. This may look like gobbledygook, but it's you take the polynomials with coefficients from the integers mod q, so infinitely long polynomial, and you reduce by a single polynomial x to the n plus 1. That's the basic computation. That's the ring we do computations over. And don't worry about this other stuff, but the ring LWE problem is at least as hard as solving the closest vector problem. That's the thing Pikert and Regev showed. And the advantage of ring LWE systems is the key sizes are smaller. Okay, so now let's get to the winners. The two winners were crystal dilithium. I don't know where crystals came from, the word, but I know where dilithium and Kyber came from, or dilithium and Kyber. Dilithium is the signing algorithm. Kyber is the key encapsulation algorithm. In both cases, they use this ring learning with error, and the ring is Z mod prime, but it's the prime is a rememberable 3329 for Kyber and a rather enormous, about 8 million something for dilithium. So the key takeaway is when you do these either encryption or signing or decryption or verification, all the operations look like familiar things. They're modular arithmetic that we all grew up with, like you use in ECC. At this point, I'm going to say something, and if you don't understand it, just let it go. There's a particular reason they chose n equal 256, and that's because this ring has primitive 512 roots of unity over that. And as a result, they can use a trick called the number theory transform to turn convolutions, multiplications which take n squared time, into pointwise multiplications which take roughly n time. So that's the only spiffy thing in it. I'm going to give you a very quick simplified dilithium, and then as I just did, I'm going to race through still simplified, but closer to the actual implementation one, and I'll do a race through of the Kyber because I really want to get to the effects. So for dilithium, A is a K by L matrix with entries over this ring I just told you about. So the ring itself, the entries are pretty large. You've generated two secret vectors, one of dimension L called S from this ring, and it has random coefficients, but they always have they're always less than or equal to n, eta, sorry, in size. And then another vector S2 of dimension K. And you compute, part of the public key is this computed AS1 plus S2. The secret key is S1, S2. The public key is T and A. Okay. So to sign something, you generate a random number a random entry in this ring where all the coefficients have size less than gamma 1 minus 1. Gamma 1 is a parameter of the algorithm, and you'll see that in a minute. You take the high bits of, you take this matrix A, multiply it by this Y, random Y you just generated, and take the high bits. Never mind how you do that exactly, but it's high order bits. You take that number you just generated, and you take the message you want to sign, append this W1, and do a special kind of hash. It's actually shake 256. And then you compute Y plus this hash thing times S1. The signature consists of Z and C. To verify, you compute the high bits of AZ minus CT, and when you compute that, you'll see that it's the same thing you expected before, you got before when you signed, but you didn't have to know S1 or S2. You compute that special hash again, and you make sure the two hashes match. There's another condition. You want to make sure that the coefficients in Z are not, that thing, absolute value Z infinity just means the maximum of the coefficients in the polynomial representation in the ring R. That's a little bit of a sideshow. Don't worry too much about that. In the real implementation of dilithium, the prime is this thing, 38,380,417. The ring is Z sub that P mod 256 plus 1. K is 1, L is 4. Those are the dimensions of that matrix. Gamma 1 is P minus 1 over 16, blah, blah, blah. You can see all these things. But the basic idea is the same. When you do keygen, you generate a matrix over this ring. And this is just a regular old random distribution. The secret key you generate from the same ring, but you make sure the coefficients of S1 and S2, which are both vectors, are less than or equal to eta. Eta is one of the parameters of this cycle. And I've given you the parameters for this strong version of dilithium, by the way. The public key is AT, and the private key is S1, S2. One of the reasons the key sizes are smaller is that A is generated actually from a seed in SHA-256 rather than specifying it by specifying each entry. That's sort of the trick used. I'm not going to go through this in detail. This is very much like what I just said to you about how you compute the signature and the verification of the signature. So that's dilithium. I actually, despite the fact that you might have think I've gone crazy, I actually simplified it again quite a bit. There's additional stuff in the, it actually took me about 2 weeks to implement these two. And there's lots of bells and whistles in the real implementation. They use hints about the sizes of things, all sorts of stuff, but I wanted to simplify it so you got the basic idea. Kyber is very similar, but the prime is much smaller. And I introduced this number theory transformation that makes multiplication easier. So again, very much like dilithium, you compute you generate the A, although A is generated from a seed, which is why it's compressed. You compute this secret, AS plus E, but you actually do it in the transform domain, which makes arithmetic faster. You generate random noise. Again, forget about CDB eta 1. It's just a way to generate elements of this ring which have coefficients of size less than or equal to eta 1 and an error generated from something like that with an error less than or equal to eta 2. You compute this number. Decompress and decode are ways to squeeze and expand numbers. And again, the encrypted version of that is these two things you've just computed. To decrypt, you do very much what you did in dilithium. However, in Kyber, there's an extra step. Once you use that, that's a basic encryption algorithm that you use for the key in encapsulation. The key size is actually fairly specifically stated as a 32-bit, 256-bit value, which is convenient since we're going to use AES 256. And I'm not going to go through the details of this. It's very similar. It's more stuff. Okay, so now the punchline. So what's the effect on confidential computing? So the biggest effect has to do with the public key sizes. For example, old SGX, the first one, used ECC 256, which was the secret standard at the time when they first did it. AMD SCV uses RSA 4096, which actually beats the latest government standard in the current things. The computation, I showed you all the computations, although your head may be spinning. The compute time is roughly similar. It's more, but roughly similar to the old public keys. And the key sizes are about 1.5 kilobytes. So they're bigger by a factor of 3 or 4, but not crazy big. Okay, so what about the software? How would this change the software used in confidential computers? Well, if you use a framework like the certifier framework in the CCC, the only change is you say, well, instead of using, when you declare the cipher suite you want to use, instead of saying RSA 2048, AES 256, SHA-512, or whatever, you add the new cipher suite, say I'm going to use that, and you don't know anything else. Everything else gets done behind your back. OpenSSL handles all the new algorithms. does the TLS exchange, you're all done. You're all set. Now, if you want to use these keys yourself or quantum resistant keys yourself, then you have to call OpenSSL with using these new algorithms, just as you would have called OpenSSL with the old algorithms pre this. The hardware is a different story. So it's very easy to adapt the software to this. It's harder to adapt the hardware to this because you have to implement these algorithms in hardware. They're not onerous. They're actually designed so they could be implemented in hardware without going too crazy. The storage sizes are reasonable. You only need standard machine instructions that, modular arithmetic, and the compute requirements are reasonable. Having said that, I know there are people from hardware companies on this call. I don't expect people to actually implement the new algorithms in hardware for at least a couple of generations. Nobody's feeling a lot of pressure to do this quickly. Oops, that's it. So, I've done like 20 slides, probably making your mind spin a little bit about these new algorithms. And the bottom line is the effect in the actual implementation, if you use a framework in software, writing programs, is going to be pretty small. In hardware, it's going to be a significant new investment in developing the hardware, and it will take a while. And the key sizes will be bigger. So it's, I guess that's the bottom line if you're buying this. So with that, I should have said in the beginning, ask all the questions you want. I typically don't open the chat, but if you have any questions, go right ahead and ask now.
I got a bunch of them, so I'll kind of let kind of up front, I guess. So the first one is when you say hardware, how much of it could be in firmware? The second one
most
is
of it could be in firmware. For example, I think
Okay.
AMD actually has a small ARM core where they do their public key operation, and there's no reason you can't have a small ARM core. You might need a little bit more memory than you used to, but yes, it could be firm. You're going to implement this in firmware. You're not going to. I can't think.
Okay, well,
yeah,
that clearly helps, right? Because
Yeah.
firmware is basically software. But okay, so that's helpful. Two is do we have a winner yet in the NIST competition, or is that still ongoing? I've lost track.
These are the two winners. This is the winner. I'm sorry. There may be new additional winners that use different kinds of algorithms, not ring learning with error, but this is it. The two algorithms I described, the thing that got me off my ass to implement them is that these are the ones.
The competition did close. I lost track. Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah, it's hard.
Last one
Well, it's only April that was announced, so you're not way out of date.
Yeah, so the last one is kind of a combination of questions. First is, how confident are we that these actually are kind of difficult to break? And combined with the other question, do you want to give some background into some of the failed ones as a possible cautionary tale?
Yeah. So these competitions since 2000, there haven't been a lot of terrible failures. Like in AES.
Well, there was one that fell in an hour and a half on a laptop, right? That's kind of pretty bad failure.
Yeah, there's one called Psych in the new one that failed. I think that's the one you're talking about. And it was actually sort of a weird implementation side channel thing. So that was really the only failed, like out and out, laugh hard failure that I know of for the new competition. And as I said, even in the older competitions for AES, there weren't like terrible, giggle kind of failures. There were mistakes and stuff, and there are things that, in the crypto world, if you have a 256-bit symmetric algorithm and you find a shortcut that lets you solve it in 2 to 252 operation, it's like big failure. So
yeah, well, what I was kind of what I was kind of leaning towards was, the mathematics behind RSA and ECDC are old and well known. The latter stuff is relatively new, and what's more, because we don't have quantum computers yet. What is the confidence? And I've heard it's not as high as we'd like. Wait. The confidence that these algorithms will be truly quantum resistant.
Yeah, I think, so there are proofs about there is a quantum model of computation where you can prove that these algorithms are strong based on some assumptions about the computation. They've been around long enough. Ring learning with error have been around long enough, so people have tried attacks. Entru, I don't know if any of you go to the crypto, but even 20 years ago, Entru, which is a ring learning with error-based algorithm, you know, there are attacks on that, but I think people have a fair amount of confidence that these will work. The one sort of like inside pool thing of these is one of the submissions was Frodo from Microsoft and others. And what they said is, you know, this ring learning with error, we don't have as much experience as we have with learning in error. So we're going to dump that and we're going to go with the longer key sizes. There may still be a little hesitation about that. But my expectation is you would be like extraordinarily surprised to see someone break these algorithms at this point. So I think they're
Okay, that's helpful. Thank
They've
you.
been well studied, and these days there's actually a formal model for the attacks and the quantum resistance. So people have pre-worried about that. Looks like there's some.
Yeah,
I have two quick questions. So first is, if this is official, then does that mean that if we submit like a FIPS certification request, then they will formally be FIPS certified? Is that?
It will be certified. So the algorithms themselves are now basically formally certified. That's what the FIPS publications are. But the hard work in crypto is actually the protocols that use them. And so now the standardization in things like TLS, IPsec, every other protocol has to go through that. That is not done yet, as far as I know. So that's work to be done. So you know, you don't have to run to your terminal and implement these right away, but it started. And you know, the first step is specifying the algorithms, and they've done that.
Gotcha. So if I directly call these signing and encryption operations, those would be considered FIPS certified, right? But if
that is
larger, okay.
Yeah, you guys know the standards business better than I. It's called a draft publication now, but at this stage, this is it. This is really the standard.
Cool, thank you. Another question is about optimization. Like, do you see, you know, you can optimize with the existing like hardware instructions, like matrix acceleration?
That's a good question, and it goes to Mike's first question. Some of the other algorithms, people have added special hardware to accelerate them. Not a public key, but as an example, might have been AES. You might remember Intel added some special instructions to speed that up. And for ECC, there are some computations, they added some special instructions. I don't really know of any special instructions I'd add for this. If you can do modular arithmetic fast, that was the whole reason for implementing it. I want to see if you can do modular arithmetic fast, you're in pretty good shape. I don't know, they've done this number theory transform, which is certainly an optimization, but you don't need to do anything special in hardware for that. So I actually don't know of any like super duper hardware, you know, based thing you'd want to do to speed up these algorithms.
John, one exception to that, I think, is the shake hash itself, which is, you know, something that, you know, the SHA-3, the Ketshake primitive in that was designed to be very efficient in hardware, and it on general purpose instruction sets, it doesn't perform particularly well in software. So that's one area that I think.
I'm talking about the algorithm itself, not the algorithms it uses, which you're right, is basically a SHA-3 derivative.
In my work, I've seen greater than 50% of the compute cycles in Kyber and dilithium are spent in Shake.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Hugo, given that you're looking at this, are you able to make comments about the assumption, well, the statement John made about the likelihood that a lot of this could be happening in firmware?
I agree with John on that. Yeah, I think if you look at what computer architectures have done for RSA and ECC, the answer is not much, right? It's basically just software in 99% of cases. there's exceptions around side channel resistant implementations and stuff like that, but I think generally you'll see this being deployed in software and in firmware, including in, you know, secure enclaves and hardware security subsystems and so forth.
Yeah, I should say when I implemented these, I didn't pay so much attention to side channels. I wanted to understand stuff, but the protection you would employ against side channels is very similar to the stuff that's been developed for like ECC or something.
Hey, John.
Oh, it's Chris.
Hey, good morning. Hey, you ran a panel with the National Academy of Cybersecurity Forum, where there was a lot of discussion about the idea that these new key exchange mechanisms had potentially different protocols.
Oh, they will have different protocols, somewhat.
And so, is that relevant in the context of confidential computing, and if so, how?
Well, again, I'll be a little bit monomaniacal here. The only algorithm we care about in the certifier framework is TLS, and that's been worked out. So I'm not worried about that at all. The protocols do have to be specified. I don't know enough to know that in some cases, it won't be more work than people expect. But for confidential computing, as far as I can tell, for the protocols people actually care about, I don't think there will be a whole lot of a problem.
Super, thanks.
I have a question that goes a little bit beyond the current run of the standardization. So it seems like we start to have an idea on the Shor's algorithm part, on the public key crypto. Can you comment a little bit on if there's anything on the horizon for like Grover's algorithm for AES like AES follow-ups? Do we need those in the next 5 years, 10 years, or is it not necessary at all? Or can you?
Yes, I will say something about that. So Grover-Ritz algorithm, the thing he points out is is a square root improvement for search. And you might think that's a big deal. So you'd have to double the key sizes. So, okay, right off the top of your head, you'd say, okay, well, if I use AES 512 instead of AES 256, I have the same protection. But the thing about quantum computing is it's very hard to get information into a quantum computer. They're very fast for computing, but they're not so great at I/O. So Grover's algorithm is not really a practical attack right now against an asymmetric system or hash-based system. And don't forget, Grover's square root improvement, the quantum, Pete Shor's algorithm is an exponential improvement. That's a big frickin' deal. I think it's a good thought to worry about Grover, but right now, as a practical matter, putting lots of large numbers into a quantum computer doesn't seem like, even if you had a quantum computer, it doesn't seem like a terribly easy thing to do.
There's an additional point there, which is for implementing Grover on, quantum computers we can imagine in the foreseeable future, it requires a great deal of memory, and that the square root speed up assumes you have infinite memory, let's say, or a very large amount of memory, and foreseeable quantum computers will not have that, and so practical implementations of Grovers will be significantly slower than that theoretical speed up because they have to make space speed trade-offs.
Yeah, I agree with that. So the bottom line is, the simple version of this is worry about the public key systems. Don't worry about anything else.
Yeah, of course. But you're also then saying that, you don't even see like in 5 to 10 years, it's opening up another. So we're actually good for now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Public key.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, who is the guy who helped answer that question? I agree with that. I've forgotten his name now.
I think that was me, Hugo.
That was you, Hugo.
Yeah.
So John, I would love to hear a little bit more about the certifier framework aspect of this. When Aditya suggested this, I got the sense, but maybe incorrectly, that you had integrated some of this.
No, I haven't. Yeah, and I'll tell you why. The reason to do the integration, which we will do, has to do with hardware. I mean, if you have hardware with a susceptible algorithm, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make the software much stronger. So really, the earliest you care about this is when the hardware's available. The thing about the certifier, though, is that if you were a programmer, remember the whole idea with certifiers, make it as simple as writing hello world using confidential computing. So the nice thing about the certifier is when you use this, it's almost transparent. There's one declaration you use that says, I want to use this public key system, not the old ones. And then all the computations happen behind your back. And the only other time you have to worry about it in software is if you want to physically use these keys yourself. Like, here's a key I got in my hand. I want to actually do a Kyber or dilithium. Yeah, but so I don't think there's a huge hurry. And I think the gating factor, I do some hardware, but my guess is if I hear an announcement about new hardware for confidential computing that uses this, I'd be ready to implement the software part in a big hurry.
Okay, and then you commented a bit ago that the certifier framework only cares about TLS. Does it also care about signatures?
Well, signatures are used in TLS and certificates and all that stuff, but TLS is the only protocol that requires standardization that we use. And in fact, we could do it without a standardization of the protocol. But it'd be nice if that my answer is you don't have to change anything except this declaration applies as if TLS has a well accepted protocol for doing the things it does now using these new public key systems.
Okay, and I guess I was thinking of signatures in terms of attestations. And maybe attestations are intrinsic for you.
When you check these attestations, you'll check the signature using dilithium. But again, the framework does all that for you. So, or in fact, OpenSSL will do that for you. So it's like, okay.
Okay. And then last thought about implications for software is the key sizes you mentioned. So we think a lot about like the computational complexity differences, but what about bandwidth increases, message size increases?
There are two answers to that. The first answer is, well, 1.5 is not so much bigger than 0.5 with comparative key sizes. The longer answer is, people often have embedded keys in places where for some reason, this certainly happened with RSA, is, when people switch from 1024-bit RSA to 48-bit, it took them several releases because it turns out they allocated space for only 1024 bits and took god awful long time to make that bigger. The in principle answer is they're not so big it should be a problem. In practice answer depends on the particular implementations. As I said, for standard protocols using Agile crypto, it shouldn't matter at all. But I am not saying some crazy IoT guy did something wacky in, somewhere and assume the key size is only something and, now he's got a problem.
Okay, good answer. Thanks. It's like Chris is next.
Looks like I'm up again. So John, Manu raised a comment in the chat about hybrid techniques, and wondered if you can first of all sort of update what is the status of that discussion, because I know some people were opposed to using
I don't think that
mode.
discussion let me say a little bit more. So people are suggesting that people use the quantum resistant algorithm and an older algorithm instead of just a single one, sort of just roughly think about encrypting twice. And I don't know exactly what people are worried about. I suspect, my guess, having done this at Microsoft, is if you tell people you're going to take twice as long to do a public key operation, they go ape shit and don't want to do it. So my guess is, at least for authentication, people won't do it. Maybe for key encapsulation, they will. But it's, it's the how many suspenders you want versus how much real time you're going to spend computing. I can't answer that question. I don't expect the argument to ever end. Well, the only thing that will happen is, 10 years from now, we'll count the number of guys who did the double encryption stuff, the hybrid, and count the number of guys who said it wasn't worth it. And that'll be the answer. It's kind of more like a vote thing than a theory thing.
Got it. Thanks.
Am I up, Dan?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't lower my hand.
Yeah,
There
no.
we go.
Sorry to keep coming in, John. So one thing that I've heard talked about, and I'd love to have thoughts of you and anyone else on the call, particularly from the hardware vendors, silicon vendors, is implementation of quantum resistant algorithms within TEs. Are there any things to be careful about, anything to worry about, any again speed ups? Or I mean, we all know that you can write an application in a TE which is, you know, terribly slow if you put your mind to it. Is there anything to avoid, and any shortcuts to be thinking about when you're doing implementations in TE?
Yeah, I don't think much. Don't forget, what you really do is call OpenSSL when you use these things. Assuming,
well, no, I'm really talking about not doing that, and talking about people who are actually writing implementations specifically to be run in, you know, which are optimized for that use case, rather than taking an OpenSSL.
There's only a general
approach.
answer: be careful with side channels and all that stuff. Do it right. You know, the normal advice we give people in crypto is, for Christ's sakes, don't implement your own algorithms. You'll screw it up.
Well, indeed, yeah, no, I know, but I do know one or two people, and I literally know one or two people who I would trust to do this. And the question is coming up, and I think it's a good question to ask.
Yeah. Hugo, actually, I should point this out, says that Meta, AWS, and Google have already implemented hybrid implementations. I'd say that's fine. I expect that. I expect everybody to implement them. I don't expect everybody to use them all the time in day-to-day business. Although maybe by the time this happens, computers will be so fast we won't even notice anything. But
well, they'll all be in our heads within the next 10 years, right? We'll just be on the grid or in the matrix or something. Thanks, John.
Okay. Well, I hope that was fun. I'm sorry, you know, I ran through the mathematical details, which I find very interesting, but that's like you have to take a 3-week course at least before you can do that, and it was a shorter talk. So
but this is a recorded talk, right? Which means that people can go back to it, which is really useful and really fantastic. So thank you so much for doing that, John. It really is beneficial and useful. Thank you.
Great.
And in fact, one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we do more of is blog posts. It's just another way to, you know, to share the information for people who aren't going to watch a recording. So, you know, if you'd be open to it, it would be great to get, you know, a short blog post from you on your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think that the tagline for the blog post is really, you know, these standards are now announced. You should be ready to use them, because when the hardware comes along, you want to use them. I can talk about some of the details about key. I mean, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did here, but I can talk about key sizes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think even just a couple paragraphs. I mean, maybe that's too short, but a lot of times I think people shy away from doing the blog post because I think they're writing a big article, but giving people just snack-sized information is also really helpful. I know I've heard from the board, from at least one board member, that they really wanted to hear from the TAC about post-quantum stuff. So I'm going to point them at this recording, but yeah, a blog would be great.
Yeah, again, the one thing I'd emphasize is, you know, it's not clear how crazy you should go about post-quantum until the hardware is there. If you're really worried about a quantum attack, then the hardware has to be quantum resistant too.
Yeah. But I think that's all good context for to explain in the article.
I mean, a great title for, or subtitle for, a blog post is "Don't forget to wait for the hardware," or you know.
But Mike, you called out the absence of this kind of capability in your gaps list. And indeed, there are use cases that are going to involve long-lived data. And so it is important for the hardware to start working on this, you know, the hardware teams to start working on this stuff.
Oh, 100%. And the fact that we have people here from Intel and any AMD folks here, we may and NVIDIA.
There was an ARM person. I'm sorry, there was an AMD person.
You know, suggest that people are paying attention, and I think it's something that I kind of mentioned to folks, you know, in my role as the ED from time to time when I meet them, to just keep nudging. I'm sure people are aware of this, I'm not expecting anyone to be making announcements in the CCC TAC meeting. I would advise against it, making harder announcements. But you know, you're quite right. We do need to be chivying people along and making it clear that if you care about this stuff, this is an important place to be putting it.
Yeah, and you know, I think the vendors have already done. For example, I mentioned AMD uses a 4096-bit key, which is already a little bit of protection. So.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for the talk, John. Thanks everybody for the good
Hugo,
questions.
thanks for helping. Maybe you want to co-author the blog post.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about that. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Are you in Cambridge, Hugo? Are you elsewhere?
I'm in Cambridge. Yeah.
If you ever fancy a trip to the Wrestlers, I'm only the other side of Haverhill, so just shout. It'd be great to go.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
My wife and I often go on vacation in Cambridge. We haven't since the what do you call it, the pandemic, but maybe this is worth the trip now.
And get Hugo to take you to the Wrestlers. It's a very good pub with excellent Thai food and very good beer. So.
Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. I hope it was worthwhile.
It really was great. Thank you.
Thanks, John. It was great.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our published agenda for today. So Mike had mentioned at the outset that he had some thoughts that he wanted to share. I don't know if those are still kind of in the forefront of your brain.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it as we went through, but I'll elucidate a little bit. So this is the question of business models for attestation. We know that attestation is something that we need to have. It's part of the definition of confidential computing that this group helped put together, and I'm really pleased about that. But if we're going to have this take off, we need to have different models for attestation. One model is, your CSP does it, and I think that is okay in a small bunch of use cases, but often it's really not. You don't want to be trusting the person who's operating. Let's rather than CSP, the operator of the services does the attestation. I think in many use cases that is inappropriate. But what other use cases are there? What other ways of doing it are there? And I can, rattle off a bunch of them just off the top of my head. So one is that the customer does it. One is that the silicon vendor or vendors do it. Another is that a regulator does it. Another, the ISV does it. Another is an SI does it. Another is a government does it. And these are, these are business questions, but they're also underpinned by technical questions. So, for instance, just last week, I had two different suggestions for how to combine attestation in different ways. One was to use zero-knowledge proofs. That was from Ming Shen at TikTok. It was a fantastic, if short talk, and I heartily recommend trying to catch it when the video is out. Another one was putting attestation claims and verification claims on a blockchain. And how does this change the business model or the availability of business models to do this? So I want to kick off a conversation within the CCC, because that is the best place to have it, about what this looks like. And it is a business conversation and it's a technical conversation. And I don't yet know what this is going to look like. I've just gathered enough interest to be sure that people do want to talk about it. I'll probably put together a briefing note and then we can start from there. But I wanted to start people thinking about this. What models do you like? What models don't you like? What have I missed out in my very brief, suggestion here? How is it different across different jurisdictions? Should the EU be doing? I don't know. So these are the sorts of questions that I want everyone to start thinking about. And if you or your company have an interest in this, and someone in your company should, I would assert, then please sort of cue someone in your company up for that conversation. As Thomas points out, there's absolutely a political conversation here as well. Oh, and there's a trust conversation, which gives me a great opportunity to say, read my book. I got it in, Dan. I got it in. But trust models. Who do you trust to do what? In what context? are really important here. So yeah, feel free to buy my book at a huge expense, and I'll sign it for you if you do. It is always reduced because no one's buying it, so that's fine. So please queue this up as a conversation within your organizations. Have a think about it, and we'll get back to this hopefully in the next few months. That's it.
I hope you saw Yash hold up his copy of your book.
I didn't. Thank you, Yash. Appreciate that. It's fantastic. Yeah, good man. And he's got a little bookmark in it as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
I like it when people have lots of yellow, stick post-it tabs in them as well. But I'll let you go, Yash. It's good having you.
So at the summit last week, so also I didn't contribute my part, but it was really good to see everybody in person, right? I've been part of the TAC for more than a year now, but I hadn't seen people face to face. It's always good to kind of connect a voice and a face and their heights. People are surprisingly tall, which you can't really tell on video. So, right. I had a conversation about this with Sal, where we have a bit of a, let's say, chicken and egg problem in the attestation space, where vendors are waiting on supporting or implementing attestation approaches, but they aren't sure if they'll be adopted. So they're like, okay, you tell us whether you want to turn on this particular attestation feature or not. And whereas cloud providers and platform vendors like Red Hat we don't know if we add support for this, if the hardware will support it. And there's this thing where, yes, it's a political conversation because you don't want to hand over control to the silicon vendors, nor you want to hand over control to the hyperscalers or the cloud providers. So it's how do we balance that? But we also need to have a conversation about it needs to be portable in some way. Like if I am running a workload and if I decide to, for some reason, switch my attestation approach from TPMs to something else, I should be able to do it. Like the person who is providing the root of trust, or the organization that's providing the root of trust, shouldn't be able to lock me in or lock the customer in. And so we are discussing it internally at Red Hat. I spoke about it with Sal. I also spoke about it with folks from ARM when I was there, Nathaniel, Mark, and yeah, they are interested in this as well. So
brilliant.
I would love to be part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, to build on that just briefly, it seems like there should be a principle that that nobody gets in the way of the customer doing that attestation themselves with hardware rooted, some kind of hardware rooted attestation. It should never be the case that anybody deliberately and unavoidably gets in that chain of trust, and then the rest of it is a matter of convenience.
Yeah, so I think that in many cases you're going to want someone to do it for you in real time because it's difficult to get right and it's complex. But you're absolutely right. There should be a mechanism that you can check that either for auditing or forensics, let alone anything else. There's also other complex questions around what are you going to be attesting? Because if you're going to be attesting every single workload instance, and you are, putting hashes in for, every new build you do, which is one way of doing it, then there's a management problem, quite apart from just a service problem.
Sure. Well, I mean, as far as the ease goes, it's there are lots of like the Verizon framework, takes care of a lot of the hard work, so you can just run it.
Yep.
The certifier puts it all under the hood, so nobody has to think about it. So the technical implementation challenges can and will be handled as long as nobody gets in the way of using the hardware provided capabilities in a direct and unmediated way.
And I see Ophir's patiently had his hand up.
Yes, thanks, Dan. I think that we need to separate the discussion into two parts, and we started doing that in that talk the poster talk that we created for the summit. We should talk about the patterns, the usage patterns for remote attestation. You mentioned some of them. Some of them are to get a secret when the application starts. Some of them are to create a trust between a client and the server. Some of them are, like you mentioned, in the blockchain to prove that a certain piece of a certain block was created by a trusted software. So that's one discussion. And a separate discussion that I think that should come later should be who can do the verification, where things should be done in the different layers of hardware and software. But trying to combine all of them together feels to me like it would be too much of different things to talk about at once, and we can split them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to do in the work is to work out what the scope should be, and to to think how to have this discussion. You're quite right. We're never going to be able to do it all in one go, but there are interdependencies that we need to understand, and that's part of the early scoping work that I think the group needs to do.
Fair enough.
The thing is, how do you make money from this? Who runs it?
I'll tell you, the customers, once we make the customer understand that remote attestation is super important for their implementation of confidential computing, which is sometimes a challenge. But once we make that happen, that is going without a problem. They know that they need to solve the first secret problem, for example, because it's not enough that they are running their workload inside the TEE. If you can read the image that will run in the TEE from the disk, from the container registry, and you'll find there the first secret, because without remote attestation, you cannot have a solution for that. Then when they understand that they need a solution with remote attestation. And so that makes it easy from that point. Well, and we have solutions for that, but we can talk about those solutions in a generic way and not only the way that we solve it here in the TAC.
Sure. Okay, great. So I think it's been a good discussion. Think about mechanisms like a GitHub issue for the attestation SIG, or maybe I think you alluded to maybe having some pre-meetings with interested parties to get the scope ironed out. Either way, I think for any significant new initiative, we run the risk of like what happened with the glossary, where there's some initial interest, but it kind of fizzles. So I want to make sure that we've got a clear commitment for anything new that we want to deliver, either from the TAC or the SIG, and that we put a date on it, which is something we haven't done in the past.
So I want this not to be a TAC thing. I want it to be a GB-led thing, because a lot of it's about business models, which is not kind of purely TAC. So I'm letting the TAC know, because I definitely need TAC people involved with it. But in many ways, I don't want it led by the TAC. In the same way that we have the repositioning and the certification question, which kind of work groups or work threads. So I'm just kind of putting it out there so that people start thinking about it at this point.
Okay.
Thank you. But I agree.
All right. Thank you. Well, with that, I think we have run the course of the agenda topics, and it's a really productive meeting, and look forward to seeing everybody again in 2 weeks. I don't think I'm going to flash the projected schedule up yet, but I think it's Alec on deck, and he and I have a meeting scheduled for the coming week to talk about the topic he'll be bringing. And until then, feel free to send thoughts to Slack, mail list, and so forth, and we'll all talk again over the interweb in 2 weeks.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, folks. Bye.
Bye-bye.